If you're a Lightroom user, you have the option to choose between importing your pictures as RAW files, assuming you're shooting RAW, or automatically converting them to Adobe's DNG format. DNG is a digital negative format, and it's different. It contains the exact same information as your RAW file. It doesn't change your image quality at all, but it does have some advantages and a few disadvantages, and people ask about it, so I'm going to give you a quick comparison. If you import your camera's native RAW file, which might be .nef for Nikon cameras, .cr2 for Canon cameras, the imports will go faster because Lightroom doesn't have to do any conversions as it imports the files. And in my opinion, your pictures are going to be more compatible. So these same RAW files, you can open them up in your camera manufacturer's native application, or you could open them up in Capture One with absolutely no difficulty, or some future app is probably also going to support these. Now that goes against Adobe's messaging. Adobe tells you that the DNG file is going to be more compatible in the future. I don't happen to agree with that. And I've already run into times where I wished I didn't convert files to DNG. For example, when using Sony's pixel shift technology, they take 4 separate RAW files and then stitch them together later to improve the image quality. Well, it only works in Sony's proprietary software, and it will not import those pictures if you've converted them to DNG. So there are times when I wished I hadn't converted things to DNG, but I did, which is one of the reasons I'd wanted to bring it up. If you're not sure which to do not convert your images to DNG. Just leave them in this original file format. Let's talk about a few of the reasons you might want to convert your images to DNG. When you import your pictures as DNG files, processing generally can be faster. You will not see the difference when you're culling images in the library module. You will see an improvement when you switch to the develop module, or if you are flipping between images in the develop module. The reason for this is when you're culling images in the library module, generally Lightroom is working with previews that you've generated, assuming you've generated some previews. So it doesn't have to look at the original RAW file. But when you go to the develop module, Lightroom always reads from the original RAW file and regenerates all the previews. So it always touches the RAW file. And DNG files are a little bit faster to process because they can be broken into different chunks. Instead of being one big chunk that only a single core on your computer's processor can work through, like beginning to end, it breaks it into separate chunks and then hands each chunk to a separate core. So it can kind of take advantage of your computer's ability to multi-process by breaking it into smaller little mini pictures. Therefore, it's faster. And for that reason, I generally like to do DNG conversion by default, because I like stuff to be fast. DNG's conversion can also reduce your file size if your camera's RAW files do not support any type of compression. Sony, Nikon, a lot of camera manufacturers nowadays support lossless compression, which does not reduce your image quality, but does reduce the file size. If you're using that or even lossy compression, then DNG files won't benefit you. But Canon RAW files in particular don't support this, at least with our Canon cameras, and therefore, when I convert them to DNG, it saves me about 15% of my disk space, and I like using less disk space, so that's a good thing. DNG files also support integrity checking. This allows the Lightroom to store a little checksum in there, and if your file becomes corrupted for some reason, you can detect that. You can tell Lightroom to go through and check for files that have become corrupted. This does happen because disk drives aren't perfect. And if you're storing terabytes and terabytes of pictures, the odds that one little bit in there gets flipped are pretty good, especially over 10 or 20 years that you might be a photographer. The checksum doesn't prevent that, but it does allow you to detect it. And that way you might be able to detect it and go back to a non-corrupted backup file before that backup also gets corrupted. I'll show you how to do that in just a second. And finally, DNG files do not require a sidecar file to store any sort of changes that you might have made. So if you make adjustments to your DNG file in Lightroom to adjust the brightness or exposure, for example, those can be stored inside the DNG file. If you send them to a different computer, you only have to transfer that one DNG file. If you modify your camera's native RAW format, CR2, NEF, whatever that happens to be, those changes have to be stored as a separate .xmp sidecar file. So for every raw file, you'll also see like a .xmp file, and you have to copy both those files and keep them in the same folder. So it just makes the files a little bit harder to move around if you're moving them between different computers or if you're sharing raw files with somebody else. So let's jump into Lightroom and I'll show you a couple of things. First of all, if you've already imported your pictures as raw files and you want to convert them later, you can convert them to DNG now and take advantage of those performance improvements and the reduced disk space. Just select your files. I click the first one and shift click to click the last one, and then go to Library, Convert Photos to DNG. Select Only Convert Raw File. Select Delete Originals after successful conversion, and then select You Embed Fast Load Data. You can also select Use Lossy Compression to reduce the file size by about 2/3. I'm going to make a separate video discussing this one particular option in a little more detail, so be sure to subscribe to see that. You probably don't want to select Embed Original Raw File, or else it will just get that much bigger. And then just click OK and let Lightroom run. I've done this a couple of times with my whole library because sometimes I don't want to take the time to convert files when I import them, but I do want to take advantage of those benefits later. So before I go to bed or something, I'll just convert all my old files over to DNG. If you're importing new pictures and you want to start by having them convert to DNG right away and you don't mind waiting longer for the import process, then go to File, Import, and then select Copy as DNG. And with Copy as DNG selected, it will import those files to you. And then after they're imported, you can already see them. It will then convert them to DNG in the background. It actually doesn't much reduce the time it takes to get started on your editing if you're using the latest version of Lightroom. Previous versions of Lightroom kind of made you wait. If you want to edit the options here, go to your Preferences dialog, and then under File Handling, you'll see the Import DNG Creation option here. Make sure you have the Embed Fast Load Data checkbox selected. It's that checkbox that will allow your computer to take advantage of its multiple cores, thus improving performance. I hope this little tip was helpful. If you read my Lightroom book right there, or just watch the videos, you would already know this stuff. You'd be taking advantage of this and thousands of other little tips. The ebook is pretty cheap. It's only $20. We have versions for Lightroom 5, Lightroom 6, and the new Lightroom Classic CC that happens to come with free updates. So every time Adobe puts out a new update, like version 7.3, you get a free update to the ebook. So if you haven't taken advantage of that, get it right away at sdp.io/LR, or you can go to Amazon and pick up the ebook or the paperback there. And if you don't yet have Adobe Lightroom, you can go to sdp.io/Adobe deal and get a free trial and just try it out. It's what we use for editing our photos, and it's what pretty much all the pros I know use, pros or amateurs for that matter, because it's not very expensive on a monthly basis. Thanks. Subscribe for more free tutorials. And if you have any follow-up questions or comments or your own experiences with RAW or DNG, I'd love to hear them down below. Bye.